The surgery was supposed to be routine. That's what my son told me when he drove me to St. Catherine's on that Tuesday morning in March. "Just your hip, Mom. You'll be in and out." He squeezed my hand in the admitting room with the kind of warmth I hadn't felt from him in years, and I thought maybe things between us were finally turning a corner. I should have known better. Warmth from Michael always had a price tag. The procedure went well. "Doctor," Haas said, "I'd healed faster than most women my age, that my bones were strong, that I could expect to be weight-bearing within the week." I was proud of that. I'd spent 31 years as a surgical nurse, and I understood recovery. I knew how to push through discomfort without making it worse. By day 4, I was walking the corridor without the aid. By day 6, I was ready to go home. When Michael arrived on the morning of day 7, he didn't look like a man coming to take his mother home. He looked like a man who had already decided something and was waiting for the right moment to say it. Sandra stood slightly behind him, her eyes fixed on the window. She was never good at looking me in the face when something was wrong. "Mom," he said, "there's been a little complication. Nothing serious. The house needs some work. A pipe burst while you were in here. The whole downstairs floor is soaked. It's going to take at least 3 weeks to dry out and repair. We've found you a place to stay in the meantime. It's a lovely little recovery center. Very clean. You'll have your own room and everything." I looked at Sandra. She was still studying that window. "What kind of recovery center?" "Oh, it's not a nursing home," he said quickly. "Nothing like that. More like a short-term rehab situation. You'll be comfortable, and it's close to us, so we can visit." "I want to go home, Michael." He smiled the smile he'd been practicing since he was 14 years old, the one that looked like patience but was actually dismissal. "I know, Mom, and you will. Just as soon as the repairs are done. 3 weeks, maybe 4. It's already arranged." I didn't like it. Something shifted in my chest, the same way it used to shift when a patient's vitals looked normal on paper but wrong in the room. 31 years taught me to trust that feeling, but I was tired, and my hip ached, and Michael was already carrying my bag toward the door. So I went. The facility was called Meadow Ridge. It was beige and quiet and smelled of institutional cleaning products and something floral trying to cover them up. A woman at the front desk smiled a smile that didn't belong to her face and said, "Mrs. Calloway, we've been expecting you." Michael signed the forms. I wasn't asked to sign anything. I noted that. My room had a single bed, a narrow window overlooking a parking lot, and a television bolted to the wall. My weekend bag sat on the floor beside the bed. Inside it, Michael had packed 4 days of clothes, my medications, and my reading glasses. Nothing else. I had my coat, though, and in the inside pocket of that coat was $240 in cash. I always kept cash on my person. It was a habit I'd picked up during nursing rotations in the 80s, when the hospital ATM broke down every other Friday, and you needed exact change for the vending machine at 2 in the morning. Michael didn't know about that pocket. He didn't know a lot of things. By day 3, I hadn't heard from him. I used the facility phone to call his cell. It rang 4 times and rolled to voicemail. I tried Sandra's number. Same thing. I called the house phone, our house, the number I'd had since 1987, and a recording told me the line had been disconnected. I stood in the hallway with the receiver still in my hand, and the feeling in my chest went from unease to something colder and sharper. I asked to speak to the facility administrator. Her name was Miss Bridges, and she was kind but vague. She told me I was a voluntary resident, that I could leave whenever I chose. And when I said I wanted to leave that afternoon, she looked almost relieved. I signed a single form. I took my coat and my bag, and I walked out the front door into the cold Ohio morning. I used $20 of my cash to take a cab to Sycamore Lane. My house was a 1960s colonial on a corner lot. I'd lived there for 28 years. My husband, Gerald, raised tomatoes in the side yard every summer, until the year his hands stopped cooperating. The front porch light was the one I'd chosen, a black iron lantern Gerald had driven 40 minutes to find because I'd seen one like it in a magazine. When the cab pulled up, I noticed the porch light was off, and there was a lockbox on the front door. I tried my key. It didn't turn. I stood on my own porch in my coat with my weekend bag and tried my key 4 more times before I accepted that the lock had been changed. A car slowed at the curb. My neighbor, Carol Tremblay, 70 years old herself. Window down. Expression already telling me she knew more than she wanted to say. Dorothy. She said my name like it was a question and a condolence at the same time. Carol. When did this happen? She didn't pretend not to understand. About 10 days ago, your son came with a real estate agent. Said you'd decided to downsize. Said you were moving to something smaller and easier to manage. I asked if I could talk to you, and he said you were already settled somewhere new and very happy. I looked at the lockbox. There were people here 2 days later, she continued. Taking measurements, I think. Staging, maybe. I'm sorry, Dorothy. I thought you knew. I didn't. She got out of the car. I didn't call Michael. That instinct, the one nurses develop about timing and information, told me not to. Once he knew I was out and standing on the porch, he'd have the advantage. He'd manage the situation. He'd manage me. I needed to know what I was dealing with first. I asked Carol if I could use her phone and her kitchen table. She made coffee without asking. That's the thing about women who've been around long enough. They understand that some moments require warmth before words. I called the Columbus Police Department's non-emergency line. An officer came within the hour. A young man who listened carefully, took notes, and then told me what I already half expected. If the property has been transferred, he said, it's a civil matter. We can note the report, but we can't force entry or recover property in a title dispute. You'll need an attorney. I told him I understood. I asked him to note that I had not signed any transfer documents. He wrote it down. When he left, I felt the frustration of knowing the system wasn't built for what had been done to me, but I didn't waste time being angry about the walls. I started looking for the doors. I'd been a nurse, not a lawyer, but I had one advantage most people in my situation don't. I knew how to gather information before I made a move. You don't walk into a difficult situation without understanding the chart first. My first call from Carol's phone was to the Franklin County Recorder's office. I asked whether any deed changes had been filed on my property address in the last 30 days. The clerk put me on hold. When she came back, her voice was careful. A transfer was recorded 11 days ago. Voluntary conveyance, joint ownership between Dorothy Calloway and Michael Calloway, with a listed agent and an accepted offer pending. I wrote every word down on Carol's notepad. My second call was to Thomas Waverly at First Federal Bank on High Street. Tom had processed my account for 19 years. He'd attended Gerald's memorial and brought a casserole. He picked up his direct line on the second ring. Tom, I said, it's Dorothy Calloway. I need to know what's been done to my accounts. There was a pause that lasted a beat too long. Come in, he said. I'll be here until 5. Carol drove me. She didn't ask questions, just put the car in reverse and said, I've got nothing on my schedule that matters more than this. At the bank, Tom met me in his office with the door closed before I'd fully sat down. Dorothy, he said, your son came in 8 days ago with a durable power of attorney. It was notarized. He said you'd signed it before your surgery. He requested full access and set up a forwarding transfer for your pension deposits. I kept my hands flat on the table. That document is not legitimate, I said. I never signed a power of attorney. I never intended to. He turned his monitor toward me. I looked at the signature. It looked like mine. Someone had studied my signature carefully, but the D was wrong. I always close my D fully. That one was open, like a C trying to be something it wasn't. Forgery, I said. Tom exhaled. He looked genuinely pained. If you contest it, we have to flag everything and freeze all activity pending investigation. Do it. He hesitated. Dorothy, that will cut off the automatic deposits too until we sort this out. I know what it means, Tom. Do it anyway. He nodded and began typing. While he worked, I stared at the signature again. Michael had always been careless about details. He'd been that way since childhood. He'd copied homework answers but changed the wrong things, kept the mistakes, thought no one would notice. He never quite understood that careful people always notice. Tom made a call to the bank's legal department while I sat there. When he was done, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses. You're going to need a lawyer today, not tomorrow. I already have one in mind, I said. Patricia Okafor had been recommended to me 6 years earlier by a colleague when my sister-in-law had tried to contest Gerald's estate. I hadn't needed her then. The situation had resolved itself, but I'd kept her card in my address book because I trusted the instinct that told me to. She worked out of a narrow office on 4th Street with a rubber plant in the corner that had clearly been there longer than the carpet. She stood to shake my hand, and I noticed she was perhaps 50, with reading glasses pushed up into natural hair and the focused expression of someone who'd heard worse and handled it. Sit down, she said. Tell me everything, and leave nothing out because details win cases. I told her everything. The surgery, Meadow Ridge, the locked door, the forged POA, the deed transfer, the pension redirect. I laid Carol's notepad on her desk and Tom's printouts beside it. Patricia read without expression, which I'd come to understand meant she was thinking hard. Then she looked up. This is elder financial abuse under Ohio Revised Code, she said. The forgery alone is a felony. Combined with the property transfer and the account access, we're looking at fraud, coercion, and potentially criminal charges if the DA decides to pursue. We start with an emergency injunction to halt the sale and freeze all asset changes under the disputed POA. How long will that take? I can file by 4 o'clock today. We'll have a preliminary hearing within 72 hours. She handed me a form to sign. As I picked up the pen she offered, she watched my signature. That's not what's on the POA, she said. I know, I told her. I close my D. She allowed herself a small smile. Good, I'll need that in the affidavit. I stayed at Carol's that first night. She gave me her guest room and a spare set of towels and didn't hover, which was its own kind of generosity. I lay on the narrow bed with the lights off and took inventory of myself the same way I used to take inventory of a supply room before a long shift. What do I have? What am I missing? What can I manage with what's here? I had my coat, my cash, my medications. I had Tom at the bank and Patricia on the case. I had Carol's table and phone. I had 31 years of watching people underestimate what a woman in scrubs was capable of. That was enough. It was more than enough. The next morning, Patricia filed the injunction. She called me at Carol's at noon. It's in, she said. The court froze all sale activity pending the hearing. The real estate agency has been notified. Your son's attorney will receive a copy within the hour. What happens now? We gather evidence. I need you to go back to the recorder's office, the post office, and wherever your mail has been forwarded to, because I suspect they changed that too. They had. At the post office, the clerk showed me a mail forwarding order placed online 9 days ago, redirecting all my correspondence to a P.O. box registered in Michael's name. The clerk apologized as though it were her fault. I told her it wasn't and asked for a reversal form. At the recorder's office, the clerk who pulled up my property file had worked there for years. She recognized my name. She printed the deed transfer documents without my asking and slid them across the counter with quiet efficiency. The witness signature on the transfer was Sandra's. I looked at that signature for a long time. Sandra had been in my kitchen more times than I could count. She'd eaten my peach cobbler and borrowed my good scissors and called me Dorothy with a warmth that I'd always thought was genuine. Maybe it had been once. I didn't know what Michael had told her. I didn't know how much she'd understood about what they were doing. The hearing came in 3 days. Patricia had prepared me carefully, walking me through what to expect, what not to say, what to let her handle. I wore my gray wool dress and Gerald's ring on my right hand, not for sentiment, because it was mine and I wanted the room to see me wearing what was mine. Michael arrived with his attorney, a man in an expensive suit who shook Patricia's hand with the casual confidence of someone who'd never lost a case he thought mattered. Sandra sat beside Michael. She didn't look at me directly, but she kept turning slightly in my direction, as if she couldn't quite stop herself. The judge was a man in his 60s, heavy-set, with the patience of someone who had seen most varieties of human failure. He reviewed the filings quietly, asked 2 questions, and then looked at Michael's attorney. "The POA document," he said. "Who notarized it?" Michael's attorney named someone. The judge had his clerk run the notary ID. The clerk leaned in, typed, and shook her head almost imperceptibly. "No active certification under that number in this state," the judge said, setting the paper down. Michael's attorney began to speak. The judge raised one hand. "I'm issuing a temporary injunction," he said. "All sale activity is halted. All financial access under the disputed POA is suspended. Mrs. Calloway, the property remains legally yours pending a full hearing." He looked at me. "I recommend you return to your home and document its current condition thoroughly." Michael stood as the gavel came down. His face had gone the color of old chalk. In the hallway afterward, he found me before I reached the elevator. Patricia stepped beside me without being asked. "Mom," he said. And his voice had that quality it used to have when he was 19 and had broken something and was trying to decide how honest to be. "You didn't have to take it this far." I looked at him directly. "You changed my locks, Michael. You sold my house. You forged my name. We were in debt," he said. "You don't understand how deep. Sandra's father, the medical costs, the second mortgage on our place. I thought if I could just get ahead of it." His voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since Gerald's funeral. "I thought you'd understand once it was done. You didn't ask." He opened his mouth. "You didn't ask," I said again. He looked at the floor. Sandra stood a few feet behind him. When Michael turned and walked away, she didn't immediately follow. She stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, and for just a moment, our eyes met. There was something in her face that wasn't guilt exactly, but was close to it. Something that wanted to say more than she could say in a courthouse hallway. She left. I rode the elevator down with Patricia and said nothing until we were outside in the gray March air. "That was 2 nights ago," Patricia said when I'd be back in the guest room. "I know," I told her. She did. The call came the following evening. Sandra's voice on Carol's landline, careful and quiet, like someone speaking in a room where other people might be listening. "Dorothy, can I talk to you?" "You're talking," I said. A pause. "I have things, emails, documents, things Michael doesn't know. I kept copies of. I backed everything up when it started because I kept telling myself we'd stop, that he'd change his mind, that it wouldn't actually happen. But it did happen, and I can't." Her voice broke slightly. "I can't keep pretending that it was okay," she said. "You were always kind to me. You taught me how to make Gerald's pie crust, and you never once made me feel like I wasn't enough for your family. And I let him do this to you. I told myself it was for us, but it was for him. He handled everything, and I just signed what he put in front of me." I was quiet for a moment. "Sandra," I said, "I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to do this for me. I'm asking you to do it because it's true. If you bring those documents to Patricia Okafor tomorrow morning, what happens after that is in the court's hands, not mine." I know. Then come at 9. She was there at 8:50. She brought a folder and a flash drive and sat across from Patricia with her hands folded in her lap like a woman in a confessional. Patricia went through everything methodically. The email chain between Michael and the real estate agent dated back 4 months, a message where Michael wrote that his mother was showing cognitive decline and would be better off in a managed setting, and that the family home represented an asset they couldn't afford to leave dormant. Another email where he discussed the timing around my hip surgery. The cleanest window, he'd written. I sat in the corner of Patricia's office and read those words in the light coming through the rubber plant, and I thought about every morning I'd packed his lunch for school, every night I'd sat at his bedside when he had fever, every year I'd quietly sent money I didn't say was a gift but was. I thought about all the years I'd spent being his mother, and how he'd translated all of that into something he thought he could liquidate. The grief of it was real. I won't pretend it wasn't. But I had already grieved a version of my son long before this. I had grieved the version who used to call just to talk, who came home for Thanksgiving, not because he had to. Somewhere along the way, that son had been replaced by the man who wrote those emails, and I hadn't fully admitted that to myself until now. Patricia submitted the amended filing the following morning. The full hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. In those 2 weeks, I went back to my house for the first time. The court had ordered the lockbox removed and the original locks restored. I stood at my own front door with my key in my hand, and this time it turned. Inside, the furniture was mostly there but rearranged, staged, cleared of personality. The family photographs were in a box in the hall closet. The kitchen table had been pushed against the wall. My hydrangea cutting in the window box was dead. I walked through every room slowly, touching things as I found them. Gerald's reading chair was still in the corner of the bedroom. The blue quilt my mother made was still folded on the top shelf. They hadn't gotten to everything. I put the photographs back that first night. Michael at 7, gap-toothed and proud, holding a fish he'd caught in the creek behind Carol's property. Gerald and me at the botanical garden the summer we finally took a vacation without worrying about money. A blurred shot of my nursing school cohort circa 1977, all of us squinting into the sun. I put them back because they were mine, not because they made me feel better, but because they were true. The hearing happened on a Tuesday that felt like any other day from the outside. I wore the gray dress again. Patricia moved through the evidence with the efficiency of someone who had been preparing for exactly this. The emails. Sandra's testimony. Quiet but clear. Tom's statement from the bank. The notary ID. That didn't exist. My original signature on file. The closed D. The particular slant. My name looking exactly like itself. The judge who heard the full case was a woman this time. She read the documents with an expression that gave nothing away until the very end. "It is the finding of this court," she said, "that the power of attorney was fraudulent and executed without the consent or knowledge of Dorothy Calloway. The deed transfer was obtained by misrepresentation and is hereby voided. All property and accounts revert immediately to Mrs. Calloway. Furthermore, this matter is referred to the Franklin County District Attorney for review of potential criminal charges, including fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of an elderly person." Michael didn't look at me when she read the last part. I didn't look at him either. I was watching Sandra. She was crying very quietly, the kind of crying that doesn't perform itself for anyone in the room. Outside, the afternoon had turned unexpectedly warm. One of those Ohio days in early spring where winter forgets itself briefly and the air smells like something new. Patricia walked beside me to the parking lot without speaking, which was how I knew she understood that some victories need to be held quietly before they can be spoken about. "What happens to Michael?" I asked finally. "That's the DA's decision. Sandra's cooperation will count in his favor. He may face a plea offer rather than a trial. And the house? It's yours." She glanced at me. It was always yours. I had Tom reverse every change at the bank that same week. New accounts, new passwords, new cards. A separate trust that Patricia helped me establish, structured carefully with a no contest clause and a designated trustee who was not my son. I signed every form with my full name, the closed D, the slant that belonged only to me. Michael called once. Late on a Wednesday evening, when the house was dark and quiet, and I was sitting in Gerald's chair with my tea going cold. I let it ring. He didn't leave a message. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten, 3 pages. He wrote about the debt, about Sandra's father's medical bills, about feeling like he was drowning with no one who could help without judgment. He wrote that he'd told himself I would understand once the house sold, that he'd pay me back, that I'd be comfortable and cared for and it would all be fine. He wrote that somewhere between the plan and the execution, he'd stopped asking whether it was right and only asked whether it was possible. He wrote that he was sorry, not in the way people say sorry when they mean please forgive me, but in the way people say it when they mean I know what I did. I read it twice. I put it in the drawer of my nightstand, the same drawer where I keep Gerald's last letter to me and a photograph of my mother at 40, standing in front of a house she'd worked 7 years to own. I didn't put Michael's letter there because it was equal to those things. I put it there because it was honest, and honest things deserve to be kept somewhere, even when they hurt. Carol came for dinner that Friday. We made Gerald's tomato sauce from the recipe on the index card I'd kept in the kitchen drawer for 24 years. And we ate at the table I'd moved back to the center of the room, under the light I'd rehung from the ceiling the way it was supposed to be. She asked me what I was going to do now. I thought about that. There was a woman I'd met at Patricia's office waiting room during the second week of all this. A woman, perhaps 10 years younger than me, sitting with a paper bag full of documents in her lap and the look of someone who'd been carrying something too heavy for too long. We'd talked for nearly an hour before either of us was called. She was going through something similar but different. A daughter instead of a son, a retirement account instead of a house. She'd said she felt foolish, like she should have seen it coming. I'd told her that seeing it coming and stopping it were 2 different things, and the only thing that mattered now was what she did next. I'm going to go back to that woman, I told Carol. I found out through Patricia that there's a legal aid program that works with elder fraud cases. They need volunteers with lived experience, people who understand what it feels like from the inside. Carol was quiet for a moment. Dorothy, she said, you know, most people would just want to rest after all this. I know. You're not most people. I reached across the table and refilled her glass. I was a surgical nurse for 31 years. I have never once in my life been able to just rest when someone needed a chart read. She laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd heard in weeks, and it sounded exactly right in that kitchen, under that light, in that house that was mine. I still walk the house some evenings, not because I'm checking on it, but because I like to. I like the way the floorboards sound in the back hallway, that particular creak Gerald always meant to fix and never did. I like the way the kitchen light comes in at a certain angle in the late afternoon. I like the hydrangeas I replanted in the window box, still fragile and new, but already beginning to take. Some mornings I make coffee and stand at the kitchen window and think about all the women out there who woke up one day to find their lives had been rearranged without their permission, who were told they were confused or difficult or too old to understand their own situation. I think about all the ones who believed it, who went quiet, who let it happen because they'd spent so long making themselves manageable that they'd forgotten they weren't supposed to disappear. I was a nurse. I know how to read vital signs. And I know that the most dangerous moment isn't when someone hurts you. It's when you start to believe you deserved it. So this is what I want to say to whoever is listening. If someone has changed the locks on your life, if someone has taken your name and treated it like a transaction, if someone has looked at everything you built and decided it belonged to them now, I want you to hear this clearly. Your signature still means something. Your name still belongs to you. The fact that you're older doesn't make you smaller. I am 72 years old. I walked out of a recovery facility with $240 in my coat pocket, and I took back everything that was mine. Not because I was extraordinary, because I refused to be erased. You can too. Start with one thing: your bank account, your key, your name on a piece of paper. Start there and don't stop, because they are counting on you to go quietly. And that is exactly why you can't.